So this is just a compilation of some images and political cartoons, illustrations from pamphlets that were common, popular, disseminated during the French Revolution. So I'm just going to try and give you translations and set them a little bit within context to help you with your analysis of them. So this is an image from fairly early on. One of the things I mentioned in the lecture is that France was divided into three estates. So the first estate was the nobility, the second estate was the clergy, and then the third estate was sort of everybody else. This is sort of hierarchical. 1 and 2 are closely aligned, but then 3 is obviously on the bottom. And so you'll see these different sort of distinctions reflected in a lot of these images. So here you have the peasant depicted in the red sort of vest with the blue breeches, then the clergyman in the center, and then the member of the nobility who is often sort of depicted with arms. And then the caption here, sort of they're carrying, it says dette nationale, so the national debt. And then the caption says, so the moment right now needs everyone to support the national debt. So in another sense, like this expense needs to be evenly distributed across all members of society, which sort of, as we talked about in class, it was not. So I did talk quite a bit about sort of the presentation of their image that was controlled by the monarchy themselves. So you have Marie Antoinette here and surrounded by her children, and then Louis XVI. These are obviously very deliberate images, and this is royal portraiture, so they look different than what you see in the cartoons. But so this is sort of their version of themselves. And then the version of them sort of produced by others comes in the form of these political cartoons or pamphlets. So just a little bit of background. In accordance with French absolutism, censorship of the press was very, very strictly controlled. So nothing that sort of questioned or challenged or was derogatory to the monarchy was allowed to be published. If it was, you were sort of run out of France. And so at least early on, before 1789, the really negative sort of information that we see disseminated is coming from outside of the country. So people who fled, and then they're smuggling these pamphlets back in. After 1789, when the revolution really sort of begins, it's just impossible for the government to continue to really censor what's being disseminated. Not so much in the actual press, but it's coming from all different sort of places within society. And these pamphlets and these cartoons are being produced so at such a high level of intensity that it's impossible to sort of shut things down. So we're talking about not just sort of hundreds, we're talking about thousands of these pamphlets. So a couple different sort of venues for this information. So a pamphlet, which is just, a few pages, some writing accompanied by images, and then also sort of these standalone images. And it gets to the point where these standalone images, like you can buy at the local market. So when you're kind of strolling down the street, there'll be people sort of selling these. And they're pretty cheap. They're inexpensive to produce. And so this leads to sort of fairly wide circulation. The other sort of reason why they're so effective is they really do require sort of a limited amount of literacy. Obviously, the pamphlets would be targeting sort of the middle classes, the bourgeoisie, those who can read, but even those who couldn't read or had very limited literacy could pick up on the images and the clues. They could still get the message without being fully literate. And so this is a pamphlet that sort of marked the fall of the Bastille, which is sort of associated with the beginning of the revolution. And then moving forward, as the revolution progresses, they're producing more and more of these images, intending to shape public opinion. So sort of the first theme I'm going to sort of show you some examples of are just deliberate attempts to undermine the monarchy. And so one of the things that they're trying to do to further the cause of the revolution is really to discredit, in particular, the king and the queen, and to really sort of undermine their authority, and in doing so, sort of legitimate what the revolution is attempting to do. So you're talking about a very entrenched form of government that's been in place for centuries. Just dispensing with that is not going to be easy. So they really need to get everyone on board to the extent that they can. And so what you then see here is a lot of caricature, a lot of exaggeration. There is no standard of fact or accuracy, and I'll talk about that in a second. So they're deliberately trying to distort the images of the king, who you see depicted here. And then this is Marie Antoinette as a harpy. So there's a lot of sort of symbolism and connotation there. So deliberately exaggerating, distorting in order to kind of further their agenda. So in many respects, the people producing these cartoons are sort of like today's political pundits, right? They seize on something that might have a grain of truth, but they kind of exaggerate, they make it into something comical, and then the whole goal is to sort of undermine the standing of the person that they're targeting. So the one image here, which has the deficit underneath. So you have, this is Louis XVI presented in the red, and then this is his finance minister, Necker. And so Louis is pointing to the chest saying, where'd the money go? And Necker saying, gee, I don't know, it was just there. And then you have those two, these are supposed to be aristocrats who are sort of leaving the room with the money. So that's what it says. I'll leave you to figure out what the message is there. On the other side, you see an image of Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette was sort of known for very extravagant hairstyles, and also sort of very extravagant purchasing in terms of clothing and jewelry. And so this is an image that's depicting her coiffure, or her hairstyle, in the form of a ship. And essentially sort of using that as a way to kind of undermine what the sort of the current situation economically in France. There's another whole sort of series of pamphlets that are called libelle. So libel. These were not something you could actually take anyone to court for at the time. And the vast majority of these actually target the Queen, Marie Antoinette. They were intended to be defamatory. They were intended to be really, really vulgar. A lot of them had, I didn't want to say a sexual undertone. They were just openly sexual in how they were depicting her lifestyle, and also sort of bringing the king into it. I'm just going to show you a few of these images. There are a lot of them out there, and I've chosen some of them more conservative because some of them really do sort of cross the line. So to this one pamphlet is depicting Marie Antoinette and one of her ladies in court, the Princess de Lamballe. And the caption there says, "I now breathe only for you, a kiss, my beautiful angel." And accusations about the queen having this lesbian affair, not only with the Princess de Lamballe, but with lots of other people, were sort of very common. The other image doesn't have any writing, but it's depicting Marie Antoinette there sort of in that reclined pose. That's supposed to be her brother-in-law, and then that's supposed to be Louis XVI kind of walking in on them. So these really had a very clear and pointed message and are part of this whole attempt to undercut the monarchy. A little bit more explicit. So this is another image. So this is supposed to be Marie Antoinette. This is the Marquis de Lafayette, who was actually very active in the revolution, but was critiqued by sort of both sides. The royalists didn't like him, and the sort of more popular forces of the revolution didn't like him. He actually fought for the United States during their revolution, so he was sort of challenged on both ends. And so I'll let you kind of figure out what the message of that is. So the other sort of theme here is just this general critique of socioeconomic conditions. So again, you have the three estates depicted here. The third estate is the one that's prostrate on the ground. There is that rock on his chest, and written on that rock, just a few words. So taille, impôt, corvée. So tax, imports, and corvées. So these are all of these different taxes that I talked about in lecture that really were part of the sort of argument that they are making in terms of trying to sort of alter the system. So similarly, this is another depiction of the three estates. So you have the tag on the bottom, the caption says the people under the Ancien Regime. So the third estate, the people, is the one on the very bottom on his hands and knees. Then you can see Louis XVI, who is sort of holding the reins and the whip. Then you have the clergy, and sort of the man with sort of the long wig is intended to sort of represent the more sort of advanced bourgeoisie, those who would have been involved in sort of running the government. And then as sort of the revolution proceeds, we start to get kind of a shift in the way things are depicted. So this one says adieu Bastille, so goodbye Bastille. The large figure is specifically intended to be sort of larger than life. He represents sort of the third estate or the peasants. And then you can see the other two figures are supposed to represent, again, the first and the second estate. And then if you can see at the very top of the building, the Bastille in the background, sort of individuals kind of dismantling the building. So all of this very, very symbolic, and it all would have just in an image conveyed a very clear message to people who would have been exposed to this cartoon. Another sort of similarly timed cartoon. So the message at the bottom is sort of the awakening of the third estate. And so you can see, again, sort of the Bastille in the background, and then this depiction of the first and the second estates. And then as the figure who is sort of beginning to stand up is the third estate. And there's clearly symbolism in the various objects that are sort of around them. And again, as the revolution sort of progresses, we start to see these sort of other depictions that are trying to sort of emphasize some of the more positive elements. So this is part of a pamphlet. Women in particular played an active role in several stages of the revolution, in particular sort of bread riots and sort of demands for more change. This one is Parisier Poisardin, so Parisian fishwife, and so she's the one sort of leading the charge. And again, if you kind of look at how this image is carefully crafted, it gives you a sense of exactly what they're trying to sort of convey in terms of sort of who is sort of good and who is bad in terms of all of this change. And then one of the last pamphlets, so this is Louis XVI after his execution. This is part of a pamphlet that sort of commemorates the moment of his death and the execution. And the caption on the top and on the bottom is food for thought for crown mountebanks. May an impure blood water our soil. So in part, these are all part of this sort of message depicting sort of these various individuals involved in the revolution and trying to get across that sort of political message. And then that's what the questions are going to ask you to address.